I always believed that when the people you love hurt you, it's never a clean break, it's a slow, quiet erosion. At first, I didn't want to believe what was happening, but the signs were there and I was just too afraid, or maybe too proud, to admit that my marriage had become a carefully crafted performance. Looking back, it's almost surreal how I let so many little red flags pile up until they turned into one giant unavoidable truth. My name is Arthur. I'm a 44-year-old commercial architect living in Savannah, Georgia. For over a decade, I built my life with Lena. We met through mutual friends in Atlanta, moved into a beautiful colonial-style home, and even adopted a golden retriever named Molly. Outwardly, everything seemed stable, solid even. But behind the neatly trimmed hedges and dinner parties, with neighbors, something darker was brewing. It all truly started unraveling 6 months ago. My great-aunt Eloise passed away, leaving behind a sizable inheritance. She had no children of her own, and had always been fond of me, treating me more like a son than a nephew. I was named the sole beneficiary of her estate, nearly $587,000. At first, I didn't even know the full value of what she left me. I wasn't thinking about money, I was still grieving her death. When I told Lena about the inheritance, her reaction was off. She didn't offer condolences or ask about Aunt Eloise. Instead, her first words were, "That could help us finally get the beach house." No warmth, no empathy, just opportunity. That was the first crack in the foundation. The thing about Lena is she's good at pretending. She's charming, people gravitate toward her. But I started noticing subtle shifts. Her phone, once left on the kitchen counter, charging, was now always with her. She changed her passcode. She started working late or suddenly needing to go on wellness retreats. I brushed it off at first, even made excuses for her. I wanted to believe in our marriage more than I wanted to face the possibility that it was a lie. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. So I did what I had never done before. In our relationship, I started paying attention, really paying attention. I checked our shared financial accounts. I noticed small amounts being transferred to an unfamiliar bank in Arizona. Nothing big at first, just a few $100s here and there. Enough to avoid suspicion. But I knew Lena didn't have any family in Arizona, and she certainly didn't have a job or business interest there. Meanwhile, I hadn't yet moved the inheritance money into any joint account. I knew better. My aunt's lawyer, Rita, had advised me to set up a protected trust. Until I figured out what to do with it, I kept the details to myself. Not because I didn't trust Lena entirely, at least not yet, but because something about the way she had reacted to the news made me feel vulnerable, exposed. Things came to a head when Lena announced she was going on another retreat, this time a week-long yoga cleanse in Sedona. I was supposed to be supportive, of course. She even left behind a printed itinerary, complete with a fictional yoga instructor named Marla. It was so elaborate it almost convinced me. But on the second day of her trip, I got an alert from the bank. Someone had tried to access one of the trust's secure folders files that weren't even linked to our shared devices. I checked the IP address. It came from Sedona. That's when I knew. She wasn't just cheating, she was stealing. In a panic, though, I masked it as calm. I contacted Rita, who confirmed that someone had made repeated failed login attempts on the legal server that housed my inheritance documents. She strengthened the firewall, rerouted the access permissions, and asked if I'd given anyone else my credentials. I told her no. I didn't even need to say who I suspected. She already knew. I sat in my office that night staring at the framed photo of us from our 10th anniversary in Charleston. Lena in her white dress, me in a linen suit, both of us smiling. I wondered how much of that smile was real. I wondered how long she'd been planning this. because now I was certain this wasn't some impulsive mistake. This was a scheme. Sure enough, the next day I received an email from Lena. The subject line was, "We need to talk." In it, she spun a self-righteous narrative, claiming she had moved some excess funds into a personal account while she was away, because she believed she could manage it better. She called it a temporary transfer. The wording was carefully chosen, probably coached by someone who thought they knew the law. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to Rita and my personal attorney, Thomas. Both were appalled, but also unsurprised. Thomas said something I'll never forget. "It's a good thing you trusted your gut. Most people don't until it's too late." What Lena didn't know was that the inheritance had never been deposited into the account she thought it was in. She had tried to steal money that she didn't even have access to. She was so sure of herself, so confident in her deception, that she didn't stop to verify the facts. And now I had all the proof I needed, not just of an affair, but of an attempted financial betrayal. She had used her time away not to meditate or find spiritual clarity, but to plot. The woman I married had become a stranger, or maybe the stranger had always been there. I just hadn't wanted to see it. But now I did, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. After everything I had discovered, I knew the next step was unavoidable. I had to confront Lena. I wasn't someone who enjoyed conflict. I'd always been the type to de-escalate, to seek common ground. But this wasn't a misunderstanding or a rough patch in a marriage. This was theft, manipulation, betrayal on a scale I never imagined I'd experience in my own home. She returned from Sedona 2 days later, breezing into the house like nothing had happened, sunglasses on her head, suitcase rolling behind her. She gave me a tight-lipped smile and said, "You wouldn't believe how refreshed I feel." I almost laughed. The audacity was staggering. I invited her to sit down at the kitchen table, the same place we'd shared hundreds of meals over the years. She hesitated, sensing the shift in energy. The air was heavy with unspoken truth. "I know Lena," I said quietly. She blinked. "Know what?" "About the money, the inheritance, the attempts to access the trust, the transfers to that Arizona account." For a moment she froze. Not the kind of freeze when someone's been wrongly accused, but the kind that happens when a person's script has gone off the rails. She recovered quickly, but her eyes betrayed her. "You're paranoid," she said, reaching for her water glass. "I don't know what you think you saw, but you're being dramatic." "Don't insult me," I snapped, sharper than I meant. "I have the records, the login attempts." I spoke to Rita. "You left a trail, Lena. You weren't careful." She sat back silent, and then the mask dropped. "You think you're the victim here?" She spat. "Do you know how many years I've carried this marriage? How many times I swallowed my pride while you worked, late poured everything into your projects, and left me sitting alone in this house?" My jaw clenched. "That's your justification for stealing from me." "I didn't steal. I was securing what should have been mine too." Those words, what should have been mine. That's when it hit me. She hadn't just planned to access the inheritance. She had convinced herself she deserved it, that she was entitled to the life it could buy. And she wasn't done. "I know about the trust, Arthur. I've known for weeks. You think you're so clever, but I'm not stupid. I've already spoken to a lawyer." That last part caught me off guard, but I didn't show it. I kept my voice steady. "Then your lawyer should have told you you're not entitled to money that was willed solely to me, protected in a separate trust. And if you keep pushing this, you'll be facing criminal charges." Her eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't." I stood. "Try me." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door to our bedroom. I stayed at the table, breathing hard, heart racing. The confrontation hadn't been satisfying. There was no resolution. Just the clarity that we were done, and had been for a long time, only now it was official. That night, I slept in the guest room. The next morning, I contacted Thomas to begin filing for divorce. Lena tried to stall things. At first claimed she needed time to process, said we could go to counseling. But I didn't budge. Too much damage had been done. Over the next few weeks, the separation became a chess match. Lena's true nature, strategic, ruthless, entitled, came to the surface in full force. She demanded half the house, half my savings, and even attempted to include the inheritance in the division of assets, despite it being legally protected. Thomas handled most of the legal back and forth, but emotionally I was exhausted. I still had to live under the same roof with her for another month while the initial paperwork processed. We became strangers, passing each other in hallways, silent over breakfast, sleeping in opposite corners of a fractured life. But during this period, something unexpected happened. I started noticing how much of myself I'd lost in that marriage. I began going for early morning walks with Molly. I started cooking again meals I actually liked, not just dishes Lena approved of. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, including an old university roommate, Ian, who invited me to stay with him for a while once the separation was final. I also reached out to Rita again, not just about the trust, but to draft a will. I didn't want any ambiguity about my assets in the future. I was learning the hard way how easily people could twist intentions, exploit gray areas. The final straw came one morning when Lena tried to guilt me into reconsidering. She said, "You're destroying everything we built." I replied, "You destroyed it when you made a plan to take what wasn't yours." She paused, eyes wet. For a moment, she almost looked like the woman I used to love, but it wasn't enough. Whatever we once had was gone, buried beneath lies and greed. The day she moved out, she left without a word, just packed her things and vanished. I found a note in the kitchen later that evening, something about hoping we could be civil in the future. I laughed bitterly. There was nothing civil about betrayal. After Lena left, the house felt cavernous, not because it was big, but because her absence echoed through every room. At first, the silence was deafening. I caught myself expecting her voice when I walked through the door, or the sound of her humming in the kitchen, but there was nothing, just Molly's gentle breathing at my feet. And yet that silence slowly became a gift. The emotional wreckage of the divorce lingered, of course. There were nights I lay awake, replaying everything, how I missed the signs, how I let things rot from the inside without seeing it. But eventually I realized that blame was pointless. There's no value in asking, what if, forever. Life had given me a painful reset, and now I had a choice: stay bitter or start fresh. So I started with small things. I cleared out the bedroom Lena used to call hers. It was hard at first, like erasing a chapter of my life, but I reframed it. I wasn't deleting memories. I was making space. I donated clothes, boxed up old photos, and painted the walls a calm shade of blue. I turned the room into a reading space with a couch, a shelf of my favorite books, and a desk where I could write down my thoughts. For the first time in years, I wasn't living around someone else's expectations. I was just living. I also accepted Ian's offer and stayed with him for a week. He lived on the outskirts of the city near a forest trail, and those days helped me clear my head. We talked late into the night about careers, family, the years we lost touch. He didn't judge me. He just listened. That kind of friendship is rare, and I didn't take it for granted. While there, I started journaling. I hadn't written like that in years. Thoughts, feelings, things I wished I'd said to Lena, things I hoped to tell myself in the future. Writing gave me clarity. It helped me understand that I'd spent so long being the stable one, the provider, the peacekeeper, that I forgot how to check in with myself. And that trust, the one my parents had left behind. For a while I didn't touch it, not because I was afraid, but because I needed to separate its value from the mess Lena tried to make of it. It wasn't just money. It was part of my legacy, something my parents entrusted to me, not to be hoarded, but used wisely. Eventually, I knew I wanted to do something meaningful with it. That's when I remembered my dad's old dream. He used to talk about opening a retreat center, a quiet place in nature where people could recover, reflect, and rebuild. He never got the chance, but I kept the idea tucked away. So I started researching land outside the city, permits, sustainable architecture. It all felt overwhelming at first, but also exciting, like I was taking the pain I'd been through and turning it into something tangible, something healing. And I wasn't doing it alone. I met Clara during one of those early site visits. She was a landscape designer, working with the development company. At first, our conversations were strictly professional. She had this calm, thoughtful energy about her, always asking more questions than she answered, always noticing details that others ignored. Over time, our work meetings turned into longer chats. She asked about my plans, about the story behind the retreat idea, and I found myself opening up more than I expected. She never offered pity, just understanding. We'd go for walks around the property, talking about trees and topsoil and sometimes life. I didn't expect anything romantic. I wasn't ready, but her presence reminded me that connection could still exist, even after heartbreak. Meanwhile, the legal side of the divorce finally wrapped up. Lena tried to push one last time to get a cut of the inheritance, but her lawyer must have finally talked sense into her. The judge dismissed her claim, and the settlement was finalized. She moved to California shortly after. I only heard through a mutual friend. I didn't care anymore. She was gone and I was free. I put a down payment on the land for the retreat center 2 months later. We named it Hollow Creek Haven, after the stream that ran through the backwoods. Clara helped me design the layout: cabins, spaced out for privacy, a main lodge for workshops, a meditation deck facing the sunrise. It was everything my father would have wanted, and in a strange way, everything I needed too. Working on the Haven gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just a project, it was a new chapter, built not on what I lost, but on what I chose to create from that loss. One afternoon, as I stood at the edge of the creek with Molly beside me, watching the water run over smooth stones, I realized something profound. The betrayal, the confrontation, the divorce, it all hurt like hell, but it also stripped away what no longer served me. It revealed the parts of my life that needed healing, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of starting over. I welcomed it. The first guests arrived at Hollow Creek Haven in early spring. The trees were just beginning to bud, and the creek had swelled from the snowmelt. It was muddy raw and beautiful in that kind of honest way only nature can be. I watched them check in, 3 women and 1 man each, carrying more than just a suitcase. You could see it in their eyes, the fatigue, the pain, the hope. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. The retreat ran for 5 days. We offered guided forest walks, journaling circles, and time to simply be silent. I stayed mostly in the background, refilling the tea station, making sure the cabins were stocked with fresh towels, but sometimes I sat in during evening talks. People opened up. They cried. They laughed. They whispered things they'd never said aloud before. By the end of the week, one of the guests hugged me and said, "Thank you. You built a place where it's okay to break and to start again." That moment hit me harder than I expected, because truthfully, I was still rebuilding too. Yes, things had improved. I wasn't weighed down by Lena's betrayal anymore. I'd reclaimed control of my life and legacy. But healing, I'd come to learn, wasn't linear. Some days still brought memories that stung. Some mornings I woke up with a heaviness I couldn't quite name. And that was okay. I wasn't trying to be perfect, just present. Meanwhile, Clara and I had grown closer. We spent more time walking the trails, planning improvements to the property, and sharing pieces of our past. She told me about her divorce 5 years earlier and the grief of losing not just a partner, but the future they'd imagined together. Her openness made me feel less alone in my own scars. We didn't rush into anything, no dramatic confessions, no sudden kisses in the rain. Just a quiet, steady unfolding. It felt different from what I had with Lena. There was no performance, no tug of war over who held power. With Clara, everything was grounded, easy, real. One night, after a particularly long day, prepping for a new group, we sat on the back porch of the lodge, sipping tea under a string of warm lights. Molly was curled at our feet, and the frogs had started their evening chorus by the creek. "I think you've created something really special here," Clara said, turning toward me. I smiled, watching her face in the soft glow. "I think we have." She reached over and placed her hand over mine, gentle, sure. In that moment, I didn't feel like a man picking up broken pieces anymore. I felt like someone who had learned how to shape them into something new. Of course, life didn't stop testing me. One evening, I received an unexpected message from Lena's sister, Ava. She said Lena had been hospitalized in California, an accident involving a drunk driver, broken leg, minor internal injuries, nothing life-threatening. Still, the news stirred something in me. I didn't hate her. I wasn't even angry anymore. But I also didn't feel obligated to show up or play the savior role again. I wrote a short note wishing her a smooth recovery and peace in her life, and left it at that. The Arthur from a year ago would have dropped everything to fly across the country and sit by her side even after everything she'd done. But the man I was becoming understood boundaries. I could be kind without being self-sacrificing. I could wish her well without stepping back into her storm. And that realization, it was powerful. By midsummer, Hollow Creek Haven had a wait list. Word had spread through therapists, old clients, even a local wellness podcast that featured our story. I started offering one-on-one coaching sessions, not because I saw myself as a guru, but because people kept asking. They wanted to hear how I navigated betrayal, grief, reinvention. And honestly, sharing it helped me too. Clara and I officially started dating around that time. It felt natural, not like a milestone, but a deepening of something already rooted. We celebrated her birthday with a campfire, just the two of us, and a bottle of wine. She gave me a hand-drawn map of the retreat grounds with little notes in the corners, best sunrise spot, where Arthur tripped over a squirrel, our favorite bench. I laughed until I teared up. Sometimes healing looks like that. Quiet joy, inside jokes, shared space that feels safe. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come. Just a year ago, I was standing in the wreckage of a marriage I thought would last forever, watching everything crumble, including my own sense of worth. Now I'm building cabins, planting trees, guiding people through their darkest moments, with the simple truth that broken doesn't mean beyond repair. If anything, brokenness is what makes us human. There's a Japanese art called kintsugi, the practice of mending broken pottery with gold. It doesn't try to hide the cracks, it highlights them, makes them part of the story. That's what I've been doing, I realize. Not hiding what happened to me, not trying to erase the pain, just filling the cracks with something stronger. Compassion, wisdom, honesty. This isn't a story about revenge or winning the breakup. It's a story about rediscovery, about choosing yourself when everything else falls apart, about standing knee-deep in the mud of your life and deciding to plant something there anyway, and watching it grow. It was a crisp September morning when the past found me again. I was stacking firewood behind the main lodge, preparing for the cooler months ahead. The creek was quiet, the air smelled of cedar and distant rain, and Clara was inside, preparing breakfast for a couple who had just arrived for their weekend retreat. I heard the crunch of gravel followed by the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming. At first, I thought it might be one of our regular delivery drivers. But when I stepped around the corner and saw who stood at the foot of the porch, my breath caught mid-exhale. Lena. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, and she looked thinner, frail almost. But her eyes, still the same sharp hazel, still scanning every detail, like she was trying to read the temperature of the room before stepping in. "Arthur," she said softly. Not demanding, not dramatic, just tired. I stood there for a beat too long, trying to decide whether I was dreaming or hallucinating. But no, there she was, on my land, in front of the sanctuary I'd built to get away from her. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. She hesitated. "Ava told me. I know I shouldn't be here unannounced, but I didn't know how else to reach you." Clara must have heard the voices because a moment later she stepped outside, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked between us and instinctively moved toward me. "Everything all right?" she asked. Lena's eyes flicked to Clara and then back to me. She nodded faintly. "I won't stay long. I needed to talk to you." We sat on the far end of the porch. Clara gave us space, but stayed nearby. I appreciated that more than she probably realized. Lena folded her hands in her lap, staring at the wood grain beneath her feet, like it might offer her the right words. "I've been in therapy," she began, "since the accident. At first it was just physical rehab, but eventually I started digging deeper. I realized how much of what I did to you, how I treated our marriage, was rooted in things I never confronted." I didn't interrupt. I wanted her to speak, but I kept my emotional distance. "I came here not to ask for forgiveness," she continued. "I don't expect that. I came to tell you I was wrong, about everything, about you, about the way I weaponized your loyalty. I thought power would make me feel whole. Turns out it just made me feel more hollow." There was a tremble in her voice I'd never heard before. "I was cruel, Arthur, not just selfish cruel. I see that now." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind in the trees. I finally spoke. "I've spent months unlearning how to carry your pain for you." She looked up surprised. I kept my tone even. "I appreciate your words. I really do. But this place, this life I've rebuilt, it wasn't easy. And it exists because I chose to let go. Not to get back at you, not to prove anything. Just to survive." Lena nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I understand." I believed she did. "But I have to ask," I said, "why now?" She exhaled. "Because I saw what you built. I saw your name attached to something meaningful. And it made me realize that even after I tried to erase you, you didn't disappear. You evolved. I guess I just wanted to see it with my own eyes, to know I didn't destroy you completely." That hit harder than I expected, not because it hurt, but because it reminded me how close I'd come to being erased, not just from the company, but from myself. "Lena," I said gently, "you didn't destroy me. You woke me up." She stood after that, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I won't take more of your time." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "I hope you find what you're looking for." She paused, gave a small nod, and walked down the steps. I watched her go, not with bitterness, but with a strange kind of gratitude. Not for what she did, but for what I learned because of it. Later that evening, Clara and I sat on the dock by the creek. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, and the water shimmered like molten glass. "She won't be back," I said. Clara didn't ask me to explain. She just leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Not for what you said, for what you didn't say." I smiled, brushing my fingers across hers. I didn't need to win, just needed to be free. It struck me then that closure doesn't come from the other person. It comes from within, from knowing who you are, regardless of who hurt you. And that night I knew I was not the man who got left behind. I was the man who stayed, who rebuilt, who loved again, not despite the pain, but because of the strength it gave me, and that was more than enough.